Many, many tales ago, Odin and his brothers, Vili and Ve, defeated the mighty giant Ymir and created the world we have today. Blood being the waterways and bones being rocks, this is the creation story for this polytheistic religion Asatru shares today. As oral traditions fade and Christianity slowly starts spreading, these stories slowly began to fade until recently. In the 1970s, when a man, Bjorn Bentenson, began to bring this Germanic religion back to light. That was until the mid-1980s, when neo-Nazis claimed that this religion focused on being a pure white ethnic group. They have taken the religious sacred symbols, such as the Mjolnir, and used it to spread hatred and white power. The Asatru's community was ashamed, and it decided it would be best to lay low, as this was not what they had intended. They embraced the idea of multiculturalism as an identify marker for modern Asatru, slowly emerging from the shadows with aid from shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom. This religion finally was able to show itself again without as much shame as it did before due to the neo-Nazis. Although no one truly knows when Asatru was established, evidence shows that it was made present during the Iron Age in the northern part of Europe, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland. This is a polytheistic religion, which focuses on the practice of worshipping multiple deities, the most popular being Odin, Thor, Loki, Freya, Heimdall, and Frigg, to name a handful of the many, over 50 deities that are believed to exist. Separated in the two groups until a war that ended in unification, we have the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir were the deities of war. They used strength and weapons for combat. This included Thor, Odin, and Loki. Then we have the Vanir, the deities that use magic. They were often called Völva. That include Freya, Freyr, and Nos. Together, they lived in the tree of life called Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil consisted of 9 realms: Asgard, the land of the Aesir; Muspelheim, land of demons and fire giants; Midgard, human territory or earth; Elfheim, light elves' land; Vanaheim, home of the Vanir; Vidavir, home of dwarves; Jotunheim, home of giants; Helheim, where the dishonorable dead go; and lastly, Niflheim, land of ice, fog, and mist. This will all end in Ragnarok, a major battle that will end up killing major deities such as Odin, Thor, and Loki. All this was documented in the Poetic Edda, made between the years 80 and 1100 AD. Due to lack of evidence and Christianity destroying a lot of the evidence, the Poetic Edda is the closest thing to a Norse holy scripture that you will get. Despite that it was written by a Christian, it brings forth stories of the gods and goddesses and how they lived unperfect yet heroic lives. After some time in the year 1220, Snorri Sturluson, an older Icelandic Viking, authored another book called the Prose Edda, which is a heavily Christian-influenced scripture and considered to be book number 2 to the Edda. It is still important nonetheless. With a little bit of backstory, we will dive deeper and investigate this religion, focusing on gender, the Asatru's clergy, salvation, practicing, ethics, and sexual orientation, while picking into a member of this religion, John's mind, and his word on it. John is a member of the Asatru religion, as coined Norse paganism and heathenry. Up until a couple years ago, John was a former agnostic. He believed that there was something there, however, he didn't exactly know what or who. When stumbling upon a video on this old dramatic religion, that is when he described it as a piece of me felt fulfilled. He began diving deeper and deeper, learning everything he could, and shared stories with everyone who was willing to listen.
Hi, my name is John Klein. I'm a practitioner of Asatru. Either he's Norse pagan or just general heathenry. I agreed to an interview today to help Kayla. I started my path on this path a long time ago with I found it a lot of ways, but I started out in Burlington, and my mom and dad were both Christian or Catholic variants. My mom was a Christian, my dad was a Baptist. Uh, they weren't super involved in the churches around here. They believed in God, but not so much what the church itself stood for. So I got a little lucky with that one. But yeah, that wasn't for every case. I at least had enough freedom at home where I wasn't constantly in the pagan broom closet per se. Growing up, it was hard. It was trying to find some kind of community or someone to talk to. Closest I got were a lot of YouTube videos and communities, and surprisingly Reddit for what that's worth. Um, it was really awkward when, because I wear my Mjolnir all the time, and it's really awkward when you're trying to work with a bunch of people and all of a sudden, well, what's that? Well, you give them an honest answer, and you're either put into a group as the weird guy, weird kid, or oh well, that's neat, and they just don't care. For the most part, most of my friends were relatively cool about it. I didn't have to deal with a lot of criticism and critiques that I know other people that follow the same beliefs I do, deal with. I know most of the time you like I said, either you were the weird kid, or I ended up just like, okay, whatever, no one cared. The biggest qualm and problems I ever had were later in life when I got more into the workforce. Um, Being that I do warehousing or I do factory work, typically, and especially in the small town, you get a lot more of the Christian, Catholic, whatever, the main religion as the main religion. And that was always a pain. That one, I've been told that I worship demons that just want to cause me harm and take my soul to eternal damnation. Um, just like treated like crap essentially. The worst one I was working at a place where everything was fine. Prior to this upcoming conversation, I was liking it. I was succeeding. I was not having any complaints. Casually during the workday, things were slow. They got a couple coworkers, and including my boss at the time, were talking religion. And okay, I don't mind talking about it because, you know, there's belief that, and if this belief calls to you, or you take an interest in it, cool. Well, I opened up and was talking about stuff, and got home from work that day and got a phone call saying my services were no longer needed with this company from my temp service. Now I know Wisconsin is a no-tell law, so they didn't have to give me a reason, but if my performance was great and I didn't have any other issues, I have a feeling it was that conversation. 100%. What else? There's a lot to it. Been a lot luckier than some, where there's stories of people being disowned, of people being chased out, basically forced or chased out of where they grew up, and they had it a lot worse. Nowadays, I'm working in Racine, and I'm also working with a lot of younger people, and they're a lot more open, a lot more accepting and cool about it. I had a few friends that I meet up with every few weekends, and finally came out and talked to them about it, and they're like, "Yeah, that's fine, man. Good on you." And they actually had positive questions, and I know I'm the only person I know particularly practicing this faith, but it's nice knowing that I can talk to people and at least they understand it. As far as like with work and the people there, it's really fun to have the conversations. Some people are very like curious about it. The only real even close and negative experience I had was a coworker was very. We got talking about religion, and uh, she asked me, she's like, "Oh, well, do you not believe in God then?" And I basically told her, it's like, well, I believe in many gods, so yes, the Christian God could be one of them, but that's not one that I particularly have a relationship with. So from there, a lot of stuff's been one of the YouTubers that kind of helped me figure out stuff and learn. They said this religion and this faith is one with homework. We don't have well, we have relatively religious texts and all that, but we don't have a structured like most churches do. We end up kind of having to do the footwork and the legwork ourselves.
Typically meant you had to be a male, as the religion focused on being brute, strong, and intimidating. It focused on war and wisdom versus magic, nature, and the healing of women. Back in the 1970s, when a statue began emerging again, founders stated that physical power and violence portrayed by imagery of Tyr and Thor reflected an 80 to 70% of the religion being male. Nonetheless, women have their important roles in Asatru, focusing on the earth magic and spirituality which represents the women deities, such as Frigg and Freya. This is thought to be the beginning of the Wiccan religion. Overall, the two correlate well together. Following what the Norse had originally done in the Viking era on Midgard, Earth, women were allowed more freedoms than they were allowed 100 years ago in modern America. Women were independently able to request divorce, own land, and manage her husband. Because of the past, Asatru knows the power of women, and so everyone is treated equally. Stereotypes still carry over, where the woman is expected to cook and clean. However, if her husband dies, she is expected to run the farm, fish, and even fight in danger. Men, however, are allowed to have more say in politics and legal matters.
So as far as gender roles and women go, in far as like this faith, um, historically they were massive. Um, there was a lot of influence on a lot of things with it. If you look at the gods per se, where Odin was the Allfather, uh, who his hall is Valhalla, where glorious warriors would go when they've died. Um, but the leader of the Valkyrie that would bring them the souls was Freya, and Freya got first choice of the dead. So she's kind of a big deal with that. And even, for instance, the queen of the underworld, or Hel, was Hel, one of the children of the daughter of Loki. They had it really right in a lot of ways. Their men could be great warriors, and you hear more about that. But I know they have found remains and burial sites where women were, and regardless of what some people say, women were buried in full armor, full looked relatively like full honors. Um, they had a lot more say with stuff than in other places. For instance, if you look at some of the sagas, if a woman did, a father could marry off one of his daughters, but one of the advice from the saga was if the daughter or the late woman did not want this marriage, it would never work out or go well. Um, Kind of a little bit of warning there. But another part that was very important was the belief of omens, and it didn't matter how well or how planned out a battle or a raid could be planned and set. If if a woman came and said, I had a dream of great defeat and a bunch of men dying or warriors dying, then they would call everything off and wait until for a better sign. Um,
Clergy in the Asatru religion is quite simple. Both men and women are allowed to be a Gathar, or a man that has a godly tongue. Women are called Gathia and men are called Gathi. To become a member of the Gathar, one must read and study both the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, and they must learn how to read and write the words of the Allfather or runes. Runes are an old ancient way that the Norse used to communicate. It consists of 24 symbols. It is said that Odin hung himself from the tree of life Yggdrasil to gain wisdom. That is when he received these symbols that are still used today. Clergy has role in politics and has say over different districts and other important decisions such as raiding and wars back in the day. Presently, in Iceland, world issues including laws on abortion and environmental issues are talked about.
as far as modern day, like I know, for instance, that you have Gathars and higher ups in the religious views. Um, I sadly haven't been able to find communities to understand how it works necessarily nowadays. I know places like Iceland still have ties to it and keep the tradition alive. But in my researching and my following of everything, one of the phrases that I really clung to and I liked was, if you can't, or when you go down this path to follow, if you can't find one to follow, make your own. It's There's a lot to it, and it's really hard as someone who's not a reconstructionist with it to exactly know all that for me personally. I know there's other people that are a lot more involved with different groups that could probably answer that question a lot better. Um, as far as politics and religion, it used to be a lot more involved, and I understand why and how and so on and so forth. But nowadays, in the modern world, it's not as relevant. Either you have someone trying to use religion to sway somebody to make one decision, or you have having them sway to make the other, and it's not a solid, in my personal opinion, it is not a solid basis on how to make laws and make decisions.
Members of the Gathar also are the ones who host what is called the bloat, or a sacrifice of an animal for an event or a deity. The main four bloats were called Winter Nights, Summer Victory, and Yule. However, bloats can be held whenever, for whatever reason, such as weddings or the arrival of a baby. In modern times, bloats exclude sacrifices and instead offer up a pre-butchered carcass of an animal instead. Beintinson stated that gone was the days of animal sacrifice, and instead offered up the alternative since it was easier to acquire and less violent. Go.
So as far as like animal and sacrificing or offerings in that regard, um, in my personal opinion, if you do it humane and you're going to offer up a livestock that is going to be consumed, then yeah, it'd be okay, but you best be doing like that. Best be for something very, very important, or you best be using that to try and make up for really messing up. In the old days, or not the old days, but historically, animals such as goats, cattle, chickens, just your normal livestock would be offered for events. Yule would be one of them. But nowadays, I'm not 100% opposed to it, but at the same time, it's not something I personally would do. It's kind of outdated, and we just don't need to be cruel to animals in that regard. Nowadays, offerings and stuff like that, depending on the god, determines what you'd make an offering for. Some examples, for instance, in my opinion, Odin really likes his whiskey, so I will offer up a shot of whiskey or some sort of whiskey for him. Loki, kind of a party guy, kind of causes problems and all that. So far, he seems to be liking tequila. Take that as you will. Freya's definitely more. When you make an offering to Freya, think of it more as you're giving gifts to a person that you would on a date, more of a romantic interest. Just due to Freya, as much as she's a death god, a warrior god, and god of magic, she's also like the more lustful side of love and fertility and all that. Now, yeah, there's always options. For instance, there was one person where guy, he's in the on Reddit. There was a guy in the closet, and he didn't have the support, and he wasn't financially great, and he's still young. Where instead of offering whiskey per se to Odin, it'd be recommended that he'd offer some form of wisdom, because that Odin is a god of wisdom. It was recommended that for like Loki, you offer a riddle, and for Freya, poetry. Now, every god has their own opinion. Like, you feel which one. Like, for instance, when I go shopping to gather stuff for an offering, I tend to kind of think more like, okay, what are they in the mood for? And just kind of relax and to a degree, let them guide me on that.
Many people also would view this as Tyler's view on religion starting as animalistic. By addressing the ancestor spirits in prayer and ritual practices such as sacrifices, descendants believed that they could appease the ancestral spirits so that the latter might avert evil and act in the interest of their descendants. Besides sacrificing live animals, a member of the Asatru would also offer up things such as ale, food, poetry, flowers, or rocks to the deities. Giving a sacrifice to a deity would also be a way of giving thanks and or asking for a favor. Certain deities also like certain things. For example, in modern days, Odin loves whiskey and Freya enjoys chocolate. If you were asking Odin for guidance, you would come forth with said object and state out loud that it is for him and the reason or reasons you are offering it. A little while afterward, you would dispose of it properly, and if done correctly and he accepts, you will be given aid or answers.
Okay. Making offerings is very important in my opinion. There, it's not something where it is demanded of you or constantly asked of you. It's not in the way of going to when you go to church and they pass around the hat or the collection bowl. It's not assumed or you're not looked down on for not doing it, but it's more. For instance, in the poetic Edda, Odin, one of the wisdom of Odin is never give more than you have to offer. Only a fool would do that. Wisdom and fools being a very complicated situation with this faith, but it, unlike Christianity, where the God is all-knowing, all-seeing, and supposed to be everywhere, with my belief and my faith is they have their own business, they have their own life, and when you make an offering, it is either asking for help, asking for guidance, or it's kind of horrible to sound, asking, they trying to keep attention to a degree for what that's worth. For instance, when I had COVID, I had a bad fever. I almost had to go to the hospital because of that. Got to like 104, damn near 105. And I asked Freya for help. Please help me get through this. And shortly afterwards, 100% recovery. Maybe a day or so later. Now, there's probably some scientific belief for that and understanding, but personally, I feel that Freya answered my prayer. And since then, I've made a point to offer what I can to Freya for that. Another good example is with Odin. I had a rough patch probably a year or so ago with trying to get financially stable, finally get ahead and get into a decent spot. And I would offer Odin whiskey and not so much ask him to help take care of things for me, but for the wisdom to know for the wisdom and guidance to know when it was time to act, and kind of the intuition on what I should do moving forward. Worked out for me heavily. So as thanks and to keep making my offerings is one part of keeping my connection with the gods. That is why offerings are important and matter to me.
Many people believe that once a member of the Asatru breathes their last breath, they will automatically go to Valhalla. However, they will go to one of the 5 or 6 realms, and it is up to the way the person died or how the person lived their life. Helgafell, called Holy Mountain, is a more modern place to go. It was where members who served as security and police would go to. It is described as the member is reliving their life, only more serene and warmer. Then we have Helheim. In Helheim, there are 2 places. Hell, where average folk go and are living completely happy and satisfied, and the complete opposite of the Christian hell. And separate from hell, in Helheim, you have Nasatrond, or Corpse Shore. This is where people who commit murder, break oaths, and lived a life of negativity would go. They were always hungry and always sick. These souls wither away. Valhalla, the most heard of all of them, is where Odin himself resides, where the Valkyries, or angels, carry up the warriors who have passed during battle. He feeds and fights together with them. Volksjanger, or Frey's Hall, this realm is the same as Valhalla, yet ruled by Freya instead. Lastly, there is little to no evidence of reincarnation. However, in a statue religion, it is becoming more common for someone to say that your vessel may be empty but your soul lives on in a new vessel. Lack of evidence leaves this area to be a gray spot.
So for salvation, everybody knows Valhalla. Everybody. Be it through video games, media, TV, whatever. Everyone knows about that one. That's Odin's Hall, or the Hall of the Glorious Dead. But I've heard stories from there being like 4 or 5 places you go where you die, to reincarnation as part of that, to upwards of 500. Essentially, every god has a hall, and after death, the Valkyries would take you to the appropriate hall or place for you. Personally, everyone's got their own interpretation. I like the idea where you have Valhalla being the place of the glorious dead. Now, what that means in a modern sense, I'm not 100% sure, and I can't give you a perfect answer. Then you have Folkvanir, which would be Freya's Hall, and either it's the female version of Valhalla, it could be where the actually good heroes are, since Freya gets first dibs. Or my personal favorite is it's the afterlife for fallen lovers, where she knows how much you cared and loved your partner in life, so she'll take you aside and make sure you're reunited with him in the afterlife. And then, for instance, you have hell. Now, I've heard stories that even hell is divided into 2, with the queen of hell being hell, which is slightly confusing, being either your stereotypical dark, evil underworld lord, to she's just very neutral. But it's not necessarily... See, one of the hard parts is, in this belief, in this faith, in some regards, good and evil aren't the same. They're not, they don't really matter as much. So, for instance, if you were a good person and did everything to the best of your ability and never hurt anybody, you might still end up in Helheim, or hell, where you're just not hungry, you're never cold, basically just a comfortable existence until Ragnarok. Or you could have been a bad person, and you could end up in another side of Helheim, which would be you're always hungry, always cold, just generally miserable for it.
The 9 Noble Virtues offers ethical guidelines on how a heathen should behave. The creator of these 9 ways to reach salvation, Stephen McNallen, enforced that these rites be situational. and just a guideline instead of a promise. Each of these 9 virtues also try to represent an Asair. The list includes courage, truth, honor, fidelity, discipline, hospitality, self-reliance, industriousness, and perseverance. Courage, Thor, standing up for everyone powerless or not. Truth, for Seti, live a life free of lies and hypocrisy. Know your reality. Honor, Tyr, when wrong, own up to it. Do what is morally right. Fidelity, Saigon, do not abandon family or friends. Stay true to the ones you love and have. Discipline, war gods. Stick to one plan, one idea, or your mind gets cluttered. Hospitality, Aegir. Be generous. Give food. Give drink. If you cannot, offer to listen or protect. Self-reliance, Odin. Needing no aid in situations, mentally or physically. Industriousness. All deities start a task, finish the task. Perseverance, Frigg. Never giving up, even if you fail many times. These virtues can tie into Mircea Eliade, the creator of the sacred and profane beliefs. He once stated that the sacred reflects the different ways it is constituted in the mind of the believer, whereas qualities given about the profane may lead the believer to a sense of otherness, opposing and opposite of the believer's sacred. Meaning, one person's thought, actions, objects can be seen as important, sacred, whereas others may view the same thing as unnecessary, profane. For example, someone may view fidelity as something sacred to have between their partners, whereas others don't mind committing the act of cheating.
The fact that they're more situational and more guideline based makes it a lot more easier and more comfortable for me personally. Um,
Loki, the god of mischief, is said to be one of the handful of gender-bending gods that the Asatru worships. He can change himself from male to female to confuse his enemies by seducing them or tricking them in other ways. Another tale in the Poetic Edda, John's favorite, tells the story of Thor, the mighty thunder god, having his hammer stolen by Thrym, a giant. To claim it back, Thor had to dress up as a woman, Freya to be exact, and seduce the giant. Whilst taking Thor's hand in marriage, the giant put the hammer down, where Thor snatched it up. Even Thor admits that by no means dressing as a woman would diminish his masculinity, as it was just clothes. Lastly, even the Allfather, Odin, the god of war and death, wiser than all, even uses vulva's or woman's magic in order to have an out-of-body experience. Although the Asatru has its gender roles, even the gods know that they are meant to be broken and know that they are not permanent. Okay.
but personally, I'm happy that it's accepting as it is. Um, I've never once had a negative issue or been told, "Oh, you can't be this for this reason." Someone I follow and I listen to, uh, he said it best. Somebody asked, "Well, would the gods accept me for whatever reason?" And the response was, "Come on, my brothers and sisters. If the gods call to you, then scold. Who am I to sit there and say that I know the will of the gods or why they call to you?" It's nice knowing that no matter what your walk of life is, no matter your choices, your opinions, in a lot of ways, um, you can still be and will be accepted by this faith.
As complex as Asatru may be, a lot of things are like my religion. I identify myself as a pagan Wiccan that is not afraid to do a little witchcraft. This conglomeration of religions allow me to open my mind to the earth and the universe. Being a part of a nature-based religion makes me feel more alive, as there is nothing better than having your toes in the grass or the wind in your hair. However, being able to control it by setting my intentions and sending it into the universe just makes life a little easier and more fun. My religion is based on my path, meaning I do not follow any clergy. I take what I want to learn from anywhere and everywhere and curate it to fit my needs. However, there are such members in the Wicca religion called the High Priest and High Priestess. They are the ones who wed couples, hold circle ceremonies for holidays, and teach classes. This is like the Asatru's clergy, the Gathar, who lead the bloats and hold other ceremonies such as weddings. The Norse pagans also give offerings to their deities, as I give offerings to the Wiccans' moon goddess and sky god. I also have representations offering the 5 elements: earth, wind, fire, water, and the most important, yourself. This makes up the 5 points on a pentagram. People view John's Molnir the same way they view my pentagram due to lack of knowledge on the topic. They associate it with the satanic pentacle. I feel as if both religions are suppressed, yet an increase of people have been coming into light thanks to media such as TikTok and Facebook that have began spreading information about said religions. The vulva or witches in Asatru are like the witchcraft practices I do, just a tad more intense. They are known for having almost shamanic characteristics, being able to talk to spirits and have their soul enter animals' bodies to be able to spy on others. I, however, unfortunately, cannot connect with the spirits on that magnitude of level, and I most certainly cannot enter an animal's body. With the witchcraft magic, one can manifest, meaning putting all your intentions into the universe. One may also carry a couple rocks or herbs with them if they are in need of something. For example, rose quartz for self-healing and love, or a bay leaf for money. Similarly, the vulva has special tools as well. Herbs, altars, rocks, all guide and help aid others. Asatru have the 9 noble virtues that serve as a guideline for how one should live their life. Wiccans too have guidelines as well. We believe one should allow nature and the universe to guide our paths, and the law of 3/karma, which means if one does a negative to someone else, expect karma to get you back 3 times. In witchcraft, you have light and dark magic. Light, good; dark, bad. All these examples are a way a member can choose to live their life. Some believe in karma. Some only do dark magic. Some only do light magic. The wonderful thing is that you get to decide. With my views and primarily my religion, they accept everyone and anyone. We do not care who you are as long as you do not affect the community in a negative way. You can do dark magic, just don't affect the community. We don't care elsewise. My take on death is still undecided, as the Wiccan religion does not have any views on such. It is nothing like the handful of places you are said to go when an Asatru passes. A lot of Wiccans, including myself, would either like to just be cremated or put into nature via a green burial. No chemicals, no tombstone, no casket, just plopped into the ground and let nature take over. This practice, of course, is only allowed in certain cemeteries. Truly, the Wiccan, witchcraft, pagan religion is like the Asatru religion, where both are suppressed, animalistic and shamanic, and more of a guide your own path kind of religion. The best way for John and I.